Okay. Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight we'll be continuing chapter 11 of the Analects. We'll be starting with verse 11. And we will.
I think we will start from 12, right?
Oh, verse 12. I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. Verse 12, and we will have 1 to 2 readings. Oh, go ahead, Jason.
Let's start. Let's read the 3 verses, right? For 11, book 11, 12, 13, and yeah, that's hold on. I'm sorry. Yeah, we should read the first 4. Let's read first 4. See how it's going. The 11, 12, 13, 14. 12, 13, 14, 15. I'm not.
Okay.
Let's try this. See what it's too long or not.
Jason, we're on book 11, right?
Yeah, we're on book 11.
Okay, and I have this version here. It says chapter 1.
Yeah, go to chapter 12.
12. Okay.
Did they start with 记录, right? Leah, did you see it? Start from 记录, J-I.
Yeah, I'm gonna find it. Yeah.
记录, is that verse 12 for you?
Yeah, that's verse 12.
Oh,
Not
right.
for me. You usually
I've got it.
much.
I've got it.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you, Jason. Thank you.
Okay, let's start. Let's read 4 verses because all of them are short.
Okay. Shilu asked about serving the spirits of the dead. The master said, while you are not able to serve men, how can you serve their spirits? Shilu added, I venture to ask about death. He was answered, while you do not know life, how can you know about death? The minister men was standing by his side, looking bland and precise. Sulu looking bold and soldierly. Sanju and Sungkung with a free and straightforward manner. The master was pleased. He said, you there, he will not die a natural death. Some parties in Lu were going to take down and rebuild the long treasury. Meng Sushen said, suppose it were to be repaired after its old style. Why must it be altered and made anew? The master said, this man seldom speaks. When he does, he is sure to hit the point. The master said, what has the loot of you to do in my door? The other disciples began not to respect Zulu. The master said, Yu has ascended to the hall, though he has not yet passed into the inner apartments.
All right, thank you. Is anyone want to read your version?
I have the Lao version.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Shilu asked how the spirits of the dead and the gods should be served. The master said, you are not able even to serve man. How can you serve the spirits? May I ask about death? You do not understand even life. How can you understand death? When in attendance on the master, Min-Su looked respectful and upright. Su-Lu looked unbending. Jan-Yu and Su-Kung looked affable. The master was happy. A man like you will not die a natural death. The people of Lu were rebuilding the treasury. Min-Su Qian said, why not simply restore it? Why must it be totally rebuilt? The master said, either this man does not speak or he says something to the point. The master said, what is Yu's loot doing inside my door? The disciples ceased to treat Tzu Lu with respect. The master said, "You may not have entered the inner room, but he has ascended the hall."
Oh, hold on. Let me share my screen. Oh, this one.
Do you need me to share, Jason?
Yeah, I try to share the screen. Just 1 minute. Let me find my screen. I just have too many screen open. So that's the right one, right? Chapter 11. Okay, so we read 12, 13, 14, 15 because they all about except 13. No, except 14. 12, 13, 15, they all about 指路. Okay, and just as a background, 指路 is one of Confucius' senior disciples. So he only 9 years younger than Confucius. He constantly traveled with Confucius, and then he kind of a brave person and good in the martial art or sword. So he would be Confucius' bodyguard. Let's put it this way. And then during a coup in the country, and Zhu was involved, then he got killed. So he's kind of the temporary, little bit rush. So that's why, Confucius treat him as a friend and like younger brother, and try to teach him and a lot of comment on him. So that's the background about Zilu. And here, chapter 12 called 记录. 记录 actually is 指路, okay? Because Chinese, ancient Chinese, they constantly call different name, okay? So 指路 or 记录 ask about serving ghost and the spirit. The master said, if you cannot serve man, how can you serve ghost? 指路 keep asking, may I ask about death? Confucius' answer is, you don't yet understand now life. How can you understand death? So this has been treated as Confucius is very pragmatic philosophy of Confucius' teaching, because as he considers serving men are more important than serving ghost and spirit. Okay, no superstition, no religion. And when Zilu asks about death, Confucius' answer is, if you don't understand life, how can you understand death? In a way, it's correct. But actually, if we see other part of Confucius, it may not 100% true, because Confucius' answer to Zilu could be, this answer could be just about Zilu, not his general answer, because he wants Zilu being focused on this life and the more practical thing, because Zilu is not the person who will think about like metaphysical question. Okay, so that's the Confucius attitude. This one, number 13. Okay, Minzi is another disciple. So here is a description. It's okay. When Minzi sat in attendance, he seems gentle. Zilu seems unyielding. Ranyu and Zigong seemed righteous. The master was pleased. Then Confucius said, someone like Zilu won't die naturally. So this one kind of like a prophet, okay, Zilu's death, because Zilu is a little, the temper is a little bit rushed, and eventually he died. So that's Confucius' comment. Number 14. People in the state of Lu were going to rebuild the main storehouse. Min Ziqian said, it can be done in the original style. Why must it be altered? The master said, this man seldom speaks, but whenever he speaks, he is sure to hit the point. Okay, this one is not talking about Zilu, talking about Min Ziqian, but you can see Confucius' point. He generally doesn't want people talk too much or too rush. So he appreciates Min Ziqian. He seldom speak. And when you speak, you hit the point. So in a way, these verses or this chapter is put after Zilu, could be try to contrast what Zilu's behavior. And another thing talk about, you can see Confucius conservative thinking, right? When the state of Lu, the people try to rebuild the main storehouse. Min Ziqian said, oh, you don't have to rebuild, you just use the original style. So Confucius consider this kind of thinking is good because you don't do the unnecessary change. Number 15 is also interesting. The master said, does not the music of Se, which is lute, is an ancient Chinese instrument. The master said, does not the music of lute, Zilu play, sounds like what is from my gate. Actually, he's talking about Zilu's, the music Zilu play doesn't sound the people or the student of my school. Okay, so I think what Confucius meant is when you play the music, your mood, your temperance will display through the music. And Zilu is a person a little bit rush, bravery, outgoing. This kind of person doesn't sound like his student. Okay, and the other disciple begin to lose their respect for Zilu because Confucius has a bad comment about Zilu. Then Confucius said, the music of you, which is Zilu, has ascended to the main hall, but not yet entered the inner chamber. Okay, this one become a famous metaphor. So Confucius' meaning is actually Zilu is pretty good, just not enter the main hall. So he already inside the door in the hallway, but not to the top, not hit the right point, but he already did a very good job. So that's Confucius' comment through music, and the Confucius comment on Zilu. Actually, Zilu, in Confucius' point of view, Zilu already very good, but haven't been that good, enter the chamber. So that's his metaphor. All right. So thank you. And Ama, please.
Thank you, Jason. I want to just zoom out a little bit for a moment to remind you that the previous 5 verses were all about Yanhui, the golden boy of Confucius school or institute. And now we get a couple on Zulu, a mention about Min Ziqian, and then another one about Zulu. And I don't think it's unintentional that it was broken up like that, because in the editing, it's very apparent. Yanwei was the favorite, but there's almost as many mentions of Zulu in this chapter as there are of Yanwei. And so breaking them apart sort of decommissions his status. It de-elevates him, makes him a secondary character to the master's favorite. But you get the impression Zulu and the master were oldest of friends. They've known each other for a very long time, and they're peers in very much the sense of being of very close age. Zulu is the rowdy younger brother, and when he's talking about the music of his lute, I'd be remiss if I couldn't just envision him singing Irish pub drinking songs with a bunch of the guys, and every student in the academy being like, how is he getting away with this? The master would have our heads over this. Well, Zulu had earned the master's respect because of their history together and because he knew him long enough and well enough to understand that although this body exterior was kind of a steady state for him, underneath that was a man of character. And I think that quote by Minzi Chan about conservatism, about why would you alter something if you could just refurbish it, was by way of a subtle hint of this is the character that exists within Zulu that the master is trying to elevate, is trying to bring out of him. Because later we'll find in this book, in later verses, a comparison between Zulu and another student, Ranyo. And you'll see there explicitly the master saying, I have to hold him back. You know, he's like a wild horse. You got to tug those reins and keep him held back. Whereas Ranyo is so timid, he needs a push to, you know, knock him out of the nest. And so you see how the master's lessons are specifically and deliberately engineered for each individual. So what Jason was saying before about that first verse about serving ghosts or serving spirits, and people taking that as, well, this is a very materialistic philosophy because look at what Confucius says here. Yeah, but he's saying it to this one, you know, reckless, foolhardy, you know, will probably buy anything briefly mind of someone he knows. That doesn't mean he buys it, but he's telling him pretty explicitly there, you don't know people, you can't serve spirits. You don't know life, you can't expect to understand death. Never once confessing, I don't understand spirits or I don't understand death. In fact, it's almost ironic that he's talking about understanding death after the 5 verses on the death of Yanwei.
All right. If anybody has any comments or questions, go ahead, raise your
I have a
hand on
question.
Zoom. Sure.
How many disciples did Confucius have?
Well, we don't know, you know, but according to according to historical account, he has a 3,000. Okay, and 3,000. Okay, and the famous one had 72. Okay, so that's the historical. And during this book, you will see the major. Probably I didn't do the head count. During the Analects, probably show up 20. I'm not sure.
Who was his main disciple?
The Zilu is the one you see, and the Yan Hui already died. He died early.
Was that Lao Tzu?
There were a few, and Minzi Chen, Yanwei, Zulu, Zigong, Ranyo, these are names you'll hear again and again. At the very beginning, I remember I made the suggestion of, I like to think of the Analects like the Simpson Copus. There are so many characters actually out there, and some feature larger, some feature smaller, but asking for sort of that inner circle, it's very hard to say because it changes almost chapter by chapter.
Mark?
Thanks, Jason, everyone, for being so erudite on these chapters. I guess I have a couple questions. I really liked what you said about how practical he was, Jason. not necessarily as interested in metaphysical questions as practical questions and how to live and how to have a state. And in that sense, it really reminds me of the Buddha, where in various places he'll say, "What have I not taught you?" They come to him and they say, "Tell us, does this, do we continue to exist after death?" And he says, "Remember what I have taught you and remember what I have not taught you." So I think he has that very practical way of redirecting people away from maybe ghosts, we could say, towards the people that are around them in flesh and blood. I was thinking that in a way, can we really understand life without understanding death? In the way they're related as two sides of the same coin, perhaps. So I was a little surprised that he didn't want to take up the question, but I think this implies that he may be able to answer the question about death, but not yet at the moment, like you said, for this student, because he does not yet understand life. And I think my other question, oh yes, it was about Aman, you had mentioned that the chapter on rebuilding the treasury could almost be like a metaphor to look forward to something about Tsulu's character. And when I read it, I thought maybe that the rebuilding of the treasury was a metaphor for Confucius's relationship to the ancient classics. Because why do we need to rebuild a whole new philosophy? Why can't we just rely on the ancient forms and maybe understand those better?
I actually agree. I think this works on many levels, but I think that metaphor also extends because it's so odd that it drops right between, we're talking about Zulu and this storehouse. Now back to Zulu. And to me, it almost comes away as an explainer of why Confucius puts up with Zulu's less than perfect behavior, because he doesn't need to be rebuilt. He just needs a little refurbishment, but he's good in his original form.
Let me respond to another comment from Mark about death. Okay, Confucius' answer to Zilu about death. One thing I feel like Confucius' profession should be, before he become a famous teacher, he's doing the funeral service. It's hard to believe a person who profession in funeral service and doesn't want to talk about death. So it's a little bit odd. And he probably doesn't want to talk about ghosts or afterlife or something, but death must be the subject. He's expert on that. And he probably doesn't want to talk to Zilu for some practical reason, because Zilu is not the person suitable or have the talent to understand or to discuss this question. And if especially this chapter is very interesting, we are in the middle of this chapter. I ask everyone to pay attention, especially to the later part. The student keep asking the same question, and the Confucius always give a different answer. So that's Confucius' answer always point toward to the student's personality, tendency, shortcoming, advantage, this kind of thing, or potentiality. Let's do it. And when I read this part, I always like to compare with Plato's Nemo, right? When Nemo asked, okay, when Socrates asked, what's the meaning of virtue? Nemo said, oh, Men have this kind of virtue, women have this kind of virtue, soldier have this kind of virtue, and slave have do this kind of virtue, right? And to Confucius, that's a perfect fine because you are different person, different position, you should do different thing on the same virtue. But Socrates will say, no, 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 no. I'm not asking this question. I'm asking you talk about what's common for all different kind of person. So I see this one is totally different, on the Greek philosophy and the Chinese philosophy. So on this kind of point, how to make a definition, they are totally different. Yeah, thank you. Quan, right?
Okay, so I would like to come back to the question of you should take care of your life or what is happening in life before taking care of death. I would like to make some distinction between what is Confucianism precisely. It's true that Confucianism has its deep root in the school of the scholars, and one of the preoccupation of the scholar in the Shang dynasty, so even before the Zhou dynasty, was to be kind of master of ceremonies, okay? But not master of ceremonies as understood nowadays, but master of ceremonies attached to the royal court. So it probably reflects their root first. Second, that school of the scholar evolved to be a school who will produce many interesting reflections and creations on philosophy and the epistemological journey. So Confucianism as a school for master of rituals, Confucianism as a school of philosophy and of ethics, but also let's not forget Confucianism since 136 BCE, a state doctrine, okay? And I have it's obvious for me that a book that is part of the corpus that you have to read if you want to be part of the state administration, it is not a surprise to have some stuff that is you should take care of the reality of this earth, or why you're not yet able to serve man, how could you be able to serve the spirits? So I think at least there are those three things in Confucianism. And also when we have a Western reading of that paragraph 11.12, most people would have the temptation to say that Confucianism is not a doctrine rooted in ontological considerations, meaning in the world that is not rooted in the senses perceptions. I think that it is the most, according to me, to my understanding, it is one of the most wrong understanding in the West about Confucianism, because on the contrary, Confucianism is a philosophy rooted in ontological considerations, as demonstrated black on white in chapter 2.4 of the Analects, when he was using symbolic ages from 15 to 70 to describe the epistemological journey. And I stop here.
And thank you, Quan, because I hope, trying to suggest that what didn't have an ontological basis, but yeah, I definitely wasn't trying to imply that.
I did not necessarily refer to what you said. It was more a general commentary. So please don't take it personal.
speaking of master of ceremonies, I think between the three hosts, we're a little lost on who's actually going to be calling for next and next. Is that going to be you, Joe, or you, Jason?
Yeah, I don't know. Jason, is that you or?
Oh, okay. So that okay. So let me do it. Okay.
Okay.
So
all
we,
right.
so
I'll be a participant then.
any other comment for this full short chapter? Anybody interested in the like enter the inner chamber, this kind of thing? No comment.
Maybe to
Okay.
3 seconds or the inner chamber.
Okay, please. Okay.
Okay, because yes, I forgot one thing that is related to what I want to say now and what I said maybe 3 minutes ago. It's very true that the Confucian corpus, when that Confucian corpus is about dialogues or conversations, you would never be wrong if you take the interpretation that the answer of Confucius of the one incarnating the figure of authority, that the answer is specifically for the guy asking the question. Okay, so I think that Jason or Amon say that, and it's very true. Contrary to the Platonic dialogues, where Socrates is speaking to a specific person too, okay, but when he was speaking to Glaucon or to Timaeus or to other people in the Republic or in the Timaeus, yes, he was answering to that person, but the answer can be construed as more general. In the case of the Confucian corpus, I would say that it's safer to say that the answer was to that specific person, but at the second level, it can be construed as a general answer too. And here I want to go back precisely to the inner chamber. And once again, I want to suggest another rapprochement with paragraph 2.4 of the same Analects. Okay, when Confucius was using the symbolic ages from 15, 30, 40, 50, 60, and 70 to illustrate the epistemological journey, we can make the hypothesis that the inner chamber would correspond to the upper trigram, okay, to precisely the symbolic ages of 50, 60, and 70 as written in paragraph 2.4 of the same Analects that we're reading tonight. And I stop here.
Yeah, thank you, Kwon. But don't take serious as a joke. Okay, if you compare to Plato's allegory of cave, right? Just reverse, right? Plato, when we go outside the chamber, and Confucius thinking go inside the chamber is better. So just a joke. Just a joke.
No. But your joke is really excellent because it's very true. Because you know perfectly that in life, when we want to say something more superior, we can say higher. And that is the image of the allegory of the cave. You come from a lower place to a higher place. Or in the case of the Confucius, it would be deeper. Okay, so you go from the superficie to the inner. But the two means the same. We go to something superior.
Yeah, so I think the metaphor is very interesting. You know, Plato will leave the cave and go outside, and Confucius, you go inside and enter the chamber. Okay, so that's a different way. But
Jason, your joke is very deep. It reflects it reflects the different ways of expressing stuff between the Chinese or the Westerners.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Joe, please. Well, we're not going to argue which one is better, but basically that's a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to come back to something that, Kwon said when he was talking about Confucianism, and it's basically one of the main points was mastering ritual, and some of the things that go along with ritual was also maintaining the structures and the architecture, the integrity of actually the cities themselves. So I'd think of like number 14 when you're thinking about that, in the sense that you're it's it's not just rebuilding something. If you were to change the architecture itself, you may even change the rituals by which somebody may actually they may perform in a place. So it's important to maintain the integrity of the architecture. That's the only thing that it really jumps out to me, because that's also I don't see a lot of there is, as was mentioned, there's a lot of consistency in what Confucius is saying throughout the Analects, but it's all rooted in tradition. So I that's my observation for these verses in particular. I mean, obviously, there's some the interactions of the students in particular, and I think each student is representing, is obviously, as we've been going through this the whole entire time, as a lesson, in a way of actually educating people in ethics from different personality perspectives. So that's what I've been taking as we go through, and seeing him as necessarily critique, whether it be Zulu, Zhuang, or whomever, is there is a consistency in how, like, each one is actually representative of something when he's critiquing them. It's almost as if he's evaluating the personalities themselves, and therefore by doing that, he's actually teaching everybody the ethical way of being, the right action, and how to attain wisdom from there.
Thank you, Joe. Mark, please.
I'm not sure if we commented on this in 13. There were the 4 disciples there. And I know, Jason, you mentioned this could almost have been like a prophecy about but Tulu, yeah. But what is the meaning of the master was happy? Maybe we can make something of that. If there are 4 disciples here, and there's respectfulness and uprightness. I don't remember the words you used in your translation.
Okay, yeah. Let me repeat this part. Okay, and then you continue if you want. Okay, so I just show my screen. Actually, when I do this, sometimes this kind of words is very difficult to translate. Okay, first is a means, that's one student, right? Seat attendance. So apparently Confucius is sitting together with a few disciples. So he talk about means is okay. So I translate as gentle. Okay. In other words, if you look at the Chinese word here, that means you are in the door, you have a speaking, so you very cautious on your word, okay? So not speak a lot, okay? And the 指路 he called 行行, okay? That's also another difficult word to translate. It probably means he shows his attitudes, like ready to act, okay? Willing to do something, okay? And then he said, 冉有 and 子贡 seems 凯凯, okay? 凯凯 means open, okay? Present, okay? Righteous. I straightforward. Let's put this way, okay? So if you imagine, if you are the teacher and you are in a relaxed situation, they have a person who is gentle, another person is kind of show his ready to do something, another 2 persons show he's straightforward. This kind of idea, and I think it's more on Confucius is in a good mode, okay, in that situation. But he made a comment: 子路 won't die naturally. Okay, so this one could be the prophet for 子路's death. Okay, but does it actually happen? We don't know. Could be the disciple later insert in. We don't know what's the situation. But I believe the situation probably, to me, I probably read as Confucius' interaction with his disciples. And then if you wait, I think next week we will touch on the very last chapter, chapter 26. That's a very long chapter. And that's the most famous chapter. It describes how Confucius discussion with a few of his senior student disciple in this situation. So I will stop here, and I remember David asked about how does the way of teaching that kind of shows the situation, how the teacher student relationship here. It's not like today's teacher student in America or in Asia. I think it's more on in the graduate school, in American graduate school, the PhD program or graduate school, the professor and the PhD candidate. I feel it's more like this kind of relationship. Yeah.
Yes.
I interrupt you, so probably if you have any comment, Mark.
Oh, thank you, Jason, for explaining that in such detail. Here's a joke, except in American graduate schools, your advisor is never happy.
It depends on which school. I think in the engineering school which I attend, I think they are generally happy because they get a lot of grant. So as students, they usually do a lot of free labor for them, so they are happy. That's another joke.
I think, I don't know how many times we are told that the master was in this good mood. It seems very special.
Okay, we will see how Confucius is a good mood or not. So thank you, Mark. Kwok, please.
I tend to understand the fact that the master joke that one like Yo will not die in his bed as a kind of compliment, because in a society which is strongly ritualized and with the virtue ethics explained at least in the upper class, I tend to see that most people would be what I call in a wrong way, anachronistic manner, normies. Okay, most people in Confucian society are normies. Okay, they tend to absorb what has been taught to them as the appropriate behavior. But as in all society, you have the left side and the right side of the normies. I would say that the right side of the normies, maybe the word is clumsy, but maybe you can suggest me another word, but I would call the hypocrites, meaning those are the streetwise people. They understand very well what is expected from them from the corpus of virtue ethics, but they don't necessarily believe it in their heart, and they will try to maneuver or to navigate the morality coming from that ethics virtue and virtue ethics to be exact. And you have people on the left of the normies, and I think that Zulu are on the left of the normies, meaning the people who are less refined and less sophisticated in their appearance, but having a true understanding of the virtue ethics. And when Confucius said that one like Yo would not die in his bed, meaning that this guy has the true heart, but in his behavior, he tends to be the nail that is not that wouldn't be seen, and the nail that is not in conformity with the normies generally will get the hammer. And it's exactly what he will get later on. He will get the hammer, he will die. But Confucius saw the true nature of his student. I stop here.
Thank you, Kwang. Joe, Chris, then we will move on to the next.
I'll be very brief. I mean, just commenting on this different types of education as to, comparing it into today's, way of approaching education and to then, I would say it's completely different in a way. I think that many ways that we teach people to pass some kind of test. And Confucius is teaching them how to live. So that is a sharp distinction. And this is supposed to be something that is, timeless as well. So it's a very different form of education altogether.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. It reminds me, even Confucius, when I learned Confucius, they asked me to pass the test. So, okay, so let's move on.
Yeah, that would be missing the point. Like, it's almost like it's, yeah, I can get the answers right. You could also cheat and get the answers right too. I mean,
yeah, that's right. Yeah. So right now I want to go back to the real Confucius. So let's go to chapter 10. You want to chapter 16, 17, and 18. That's those three.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
Sukang asked which of the two, she or Shang, was the superior. The master said, she goes beyond the do me, and Shang does not come up to it. Then said Sukang, the superiority is with she, I suppose. The master said, to go beyond is as wrong as to fall short. Chapter 17. The head of the Qi family was richer than the Duke of Chao had been, and yet Chiu collected his imposts for him and increased his wealth. The master said, he is no disciple of mine. My little children beat the drum and assail him. Chapter 18. Chai is simple, Shan is dull, she is specious, Yu is coarse.
Thank you. Anyone want to read a different translation? Mark?
Sure, I can read Lao. I think we're on 16, right?
Yeah, 16.
Su Kung asked, who is superior, she or Shang? The master said, she overshoots the mark, Shang falls short. Does that mean that she is in fact better? The master said, there is little to choose between overshooting the mark and falling short. 17. The wealth of the Qi family was greater than that of the Duke of Chu, and still Chiu helped them add further to that wealth by raking in the taxes. The master said, he is no disciple of mine. You, my young friends, may attack him openly to the beating of drums. 18. The master said, Chai is stupid, San is slow, she is one-sided, you is forthright.
Can you Mark, what's the last word for you?
Forthright.
Oh, forthright. Okay, thank you. Yeah, all this kind of common is very difficult to translate. So I really appreciate the different kind of translation, because even the modern Chinese cannot properly translate all these words. So English even more difficult. So chapter 16. Okay. This one is an important message here. 子贡 asked, 师 or son, who is more worthy? The master said, okay, 师 is 子张 and son is 子夏. Okay, both 子张 and 子夏 are Confucius' very young disciple. They are 44, 45 years younger than Confucius, and basic after the death of Confucius, 子张 and 子夏, or you call 师 and the son, these two young disciples running two rivalry Confucian schools. Okay, so they have a slightly different idea. Okay, for them, and so that's why we have this dialogue. They try to bring back what's Confucius common on these two students. So 子贡, they use the 子贡 to ask the question. 子贡 is a little bit more senior to them, and 子贡 is good in language. So 子贡 asks 师, which is 子张 or 子夏, who is more worthy? The master said, 师, which is 子张, goes too far. Son doesn't go far enough. Okay, so 子贡 draw the conclusion. So 师 is superior because he go far, right? And the son is not far enough. If you go too far, it's superior. And the master said, too far is the same as not enough. Basically, he is talking about both are not the same bad, okay, or same good, okay. So this one bring up to very important message in the Confucius school, which called the doctrine of the mean. So everything should be just right. You don't go too far or too short. Both are very important. And we will see this one if we pay attention in the other chapter. Chapter 17. Okay. The Ji family was wealthier than the Duke of Lu. Okay. So here the original text said 季氏富于周公. So most of the translation will say Ji family was wealthier than Duke of Zhou or Zhou Chou. Okay. I think he meant, okay, the Duke of Lu, which is Confucius' home state. The reason Confucius say is wealthier than Duke Zhou is because the founder of state of Lu is Duke of Zhou's first son. Okay, that's why Confucius he said this chapter talking about the Ji family was wealthier than Duke of Lu. That means the house is wealthier than your lord. Okay, that's the problem. You should not have more. You should not be wealthier than your lord. Okay, so still Ran Qiu collect money for them and increase their wealth. Okay, Qiu is Confucius' disciple, and if you go back to chapter 3. Confucius, actually, he is a very capable person. I think he's good in the financial. All right. So during chapter 3, Confucius said, Ran Qiu is good in government. Okay, so good in the administration. But here, Confucius has criticized him because he collect money for them. He's in the financial service for the Ji family. So the master said, not my disciples. Oh, I will allow you to beat the drum and condemn him. So sounds like it's a very harsh word. And that I'm not sure how angry or what's the mode of Confucius, but based on this sentence, sounds like just back to, the master is always happy or not happy. Seems he's not happy during this time when he know this one. And I see this one is very harsh word and just kind of like the teacher tell the student, he did something wrong. You can feel free to criticize him. That's this kind of situation. Okay, but again, I just want to say Ran Qiu, okay, is a very capable person, and the Confucius constantly recommend him. Okay, that's the fact. Number 18, and this one is also very interesting to compare this one with chapter 3, because chapter 3 talk about 10 students in the different category. Usually that's a good student. And then here, list 4 students basically talk about their disadvantage, their shortcomings, their fault. And only one person show up on 2 categories, good and bad, which is Zilu, which is you. Okay, so here it says, Chai is dumb. Okay, Shen, which is Zheng Shen, I think in book 6 or something, that's all about Zheng Shen. Is dual. Shi, Shi, which is Zizang, is spacious, and Yu is coarse. And if we list all these 4 shortcomings, we can see Confucius' comment is here. First, Cai, which is Zi Gao, I think we will talk about later. He's not smart enough. And Shen, okay, Zheng Shen, which become major Confucian leader after the death of Confucius. Okay, he is not quick enough. He say "lu," that means slow in response. And then Shi Zizang, okay, he is, I think DC Lao's translation called one-sided. I think that makes sense. But another way to look at it is not sincere. It's also right. But after I heard this one, I think this one could be means one-sided, not comprehensive. That's the meaning. And the important thing is about Zilu. Zilu is coarse, is rough, not prudent, don't think enough. I think that's all important here. Yeah, thank you. Amang.
Thank you. I'm not going to go over the doctrine of the mean very much. I will say that the idea of not far enough versus too much, it's a commentary on effort, on what efforts does one make, and being able to learn to gauge the proper effort for the activity. And why this is why it's as bad to go too far than it is to go not far enough, to overshoot the mark versus to fall short of the mark. The chapter or verse 11 about Rancho collecting for the G family, as Jason was talking about it, this may be a dated sort of reference, and because I'm here in the Northwest, but I couldn't help but think of Bill Gates and Paul Allen, 2 incredibly wealthy icons in this area. And the idea of someone being hired for Paul Allen to go and make him even more money, go make him, and Confucius saying it's improper that he be richer than Bill Gates. Bill Gates started this. He should know his place, and you're just helping him to accumulate more wealth for what? Wealth's sake? Avarice for avarice? That's absolutely abysmal. And so he tells his disciples, when Ranchu gets back, feel free to reenact the shame scene from Game of Thrones. And that's basically what the condemn him and beat the drums is you're going to call him out as soon as he walks through the door, humiliate him, shame him. There's nothing wrong with shaming him, because what he's doing is the antithesis of what I have taught my students to do, which is put your skills and talents into service for other people, not to just enrich somebody who's already damn well rich enough. And that last section on the foibles of his students, you get a taste of how prickly Confucius could probably be as a teacher. So what do you think of Cha? He's dumb. I mean, I can't think of a teacher who hasn't wanted at one point in their career to say something so very on the nose and so unabashed and so unchecked. But in Confucius' time and in his philosophy, there's an element of the truth can hurt, but it's the truth. And that's really what matters. The master saying this isn't saying it because he's going out of his way to hurt your feelings. It's because this is your shortfall. Start working on it. Start improving it. And when he refers to Zulu as being coarse, again, I'm back in the Irish pub thinking of this man and wondering at, despite him being so much the character of probably what all his students thought was, this is not Junsa, this is not how a proper gentleman should be. Confucius still sees something in Zulu of value, of worth, of merit, and is polishing and grinding that stone throughout the entire course of their lives together to just make it that much better, that much better, that much better. And I think that's why he sees Zulu as kind of the abject lesson for his students. Look, as bad as you may think he is, he's actually more diligently, he's here every day. He's doing the work every day and he's improving every day. He just had a long way to improve from. How many of you can say the same thing?
Okay, thank you, Amang. David, please.
Yeah, I like what's being said. I think these three actually fit together very nicely because they are all looking at one angle and then saying that's not enough to look at. You know, you think it's oh, here's a simple problem. You know, who's better? Well, he doesn't go far enough. He goes beyond the mark. If you say it wrong, that sounds like a huge compliment. So you have to look at exactly what's the other side of that, you know? And then the second verse that's being examined is about someone who's previously been demonstrated as a competent financier. But that's not a comprehensive judgment on how this person displays in the world and everything they do, because they're not using their judgment comprehensively in other areas. So what they're missing is a balance in terms of respect for what it means to accumulate wealth and in the society, what it means in terms of other people and, you know, judging themselves in a proportion. Judgment is a multidimensional thing. So being a one-sided viewer of things, yes, you can be very sharp in that. You can be very smart in that. And yet that is not the real meaning of what the lessons are. The lessons are turn it around, see if there's another side, see what you're missing. What have you filled up or what have you left empty? So this is a sort of maybe a suggestion on how to hear these judgments. Oh, he's coarse. Okay, you're going to get a big grain of truth out of him. That's the first thing you don't, you know, okay, it's not totally refined, but this guy is going to give you something solid. You know, you have to hear both sides of the judgments about people to take the good part from them as well as know their limitation. So when you're criticized by your teacher, you're not being told you're allowed. You're being told, well, that's all you do. Okay, you know, are you working on the other side, the side you don't see? So I think this is that's been helpful that these are all sitting together, working together as Amon said, these are about the mean in a certain sense, but you're sometimes looking at things only from one side and not realizing, oh, where is the mean? It has to do with the other side that I've omitted from my consideration.
Thank you, David. Yeah. Joe, please.
Definitely agree with David that these three go together. You know, actually, I can say that in a way, I look at these three as, and through a Stoic lens, through the discipline of desire, which is an idea of balance. So when you have two extremes, neither is good, and the idea of temperance is something that is important. So that's the first one. And then the second one I see as well is the idea that how are you using your talents? Are you using your talents to enrich people that already have enough, or are you using your talents to create a more just society? And that's very much like the discipline of action, which is based on justice. So the third way I look at this is that the idea of evaluating the students and their capabilities. When the first thing that you have to do in order to, know how to maximize whatever your talents are, is the idea of judgment, not of others, but also judgment of yourself. So assenting to certain impressions. So think about it in terms of a student that will judge a part of something they did well or something they didn't do well. Let's say I'm a Mon student in a class, and I failed one of his very hard tests that, and just like everything. And so I just can assent to the judgment that I'm a bad student, or I could actually look at it rationally and I say it's one test. I didn't fail the course. And even if I failed the course, that doesn't mean I didn't necessarily fail every class. It's a part, not the whole. Just the idea, if you had passed a test and done well, then nor are you a great student either. So it's this idea of, in evaluating his students, he's giving them self-knowledge. So that's the way I kind of can see some parallels to these three areas, these three passages, which actually work well together.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Mark, please.
I was just thinking that it says a lot about Confucius, that he would attract people of different characters and that he would accept students of different characters and personalities. He wasn't just looking for clones of himself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Joe, now I see you're smiling at something Aman wrote, and I have like fear of missing out. But okay, I'll go back and check that. So that was one thing, that he's really not trying to find clones for himself. The other thing was, I thought there was an interesting contrast between chapter 13, which mentioned 4 students all having, I believe, positive characteristics, and 18, which mentions 4 students who seem to have negative characteristics. And maybe there's even a kind of rhythm going through here, almost like a wave, from the positive to the negative, because we seem to get things about students who were respected, and then about Min Chu Qian, who doesn't say much, but he says to the point, and then Yu's Lute, which was kind of critical but yet forgiving, and then 2 who overshoot and undershoot, so more on the negative, then really going to the negative, like the trough. We've reached the nadir almost in 11:17, or maybe 11:18. So I'm just speculating that maybe there's this kind of wave function going through here. where the positive and negative are alternating in a way.
Thank you, Mark, for your observation. Actually, I didn't notice until now. It go from the good comment and I just take these three together. I'm not aware. They all talk about negative characteristic, but it happened this way. Yeah, thank you everyone to remind me. Joe, please.
One brief last comment is that what is also interesting is that, and I asked in a conversation with Quan last week, the idea how to cultivate virtue, and I'm starting to see it a little bit more clearly in Confucius, and I have over the past. I understand the ritualistic aspect of it is one way of cultivation, as long as the ritual doesn't, take place of not knowing why the ritual exists in the first place. But the other thing that I would say is that if you read this and you think about it carefully and then apply it to your own life, that this is very practical. I mean, in a way. And I think that you can extract certain virtues that actually lead directly to how to live. Not maybe, yes, how to live, essentially.
Thank you, Joe. Any other comment? Kwang, please.
Yes, a short comment on what Joe just said, because in virtue ethics, role models are very important. And I would like just to mention a historical note. Most of the people interested in the school of the scholars know that the pet students of Confucius is Yan Hui, of course. But the second one is Mingzi Qian, precisely, the one that is mentioned here. And in the imperial corpus of Confucianism, Mingzi Qian is one of the 24 exemplars for filial piety, okay, that famous Confucian virtue Xiao, which is as important as Zhong, okay, Xiao, filial piety, and Zhong, loyalty, the family and the state. I stop here.
Thank you, Kwang.
I'll just tell everyone, just so Mark doesn't feel like he was missing out, I just mentioned that I rebranded my test into Happy Golden Fund Reviews, because we should always consider the marketing.
Thank you for good teachers. I wish I had this kind of teacher. Okay, if no more comment, let's go to the next three. Let's go to 19, 20, and 21. I think we will end at 21 for today. And I think we probably will go 10 or roughly 10 chapters each week. And so next week, since next week we will cover a very long one. So I think we can finish book 11 next week. So Penny, can you please read 3 chapters from 19, 20, 21?
Yes. Chapter 19. The master said, "There is we. He has nearly attained to perfect virtue. He is often in want. Su does not acquiesce in the appointments of heaven, and his goods are increased by him. Yet his judgments are often correct." Chapter 20. Su Cheng asked which were the characteristics of the good man. The master said, "He does not tread in the footsteps of others, but moreover, he does not enter the chamber of the sage." Chapter 21. The master said, "If Because a man's discourse appears solid and sincere, we allow him to be a good man. Is he really a superior man, or is his gravity only an appearance?
Penny, can you read the chapter 20 on the first sentence?
Yes. Si-chung asked, what were the characteristics of the good man?
Okay, thank you. Good man. Okay, so thank you. Mark, can you read your version, please?
19. The master said, Hui is perhaps difficult to improve upon. He allows himself constantly to be in dire poverty. Su refuses to accept his lot and indulges in money-making and is frequently right in his conjectures. 20. Su Chang asked about the way of the good man. The master said, such a man does not follow in other people's footsteps, neither does he gain entrance into the inner room. 21. The master said, is one who simply sides with tenacious opinions a gentleman, or is he merely putting on a dignified appearance?
Thank you, Mark. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, so let's start from 19. Okay, here's Confucius compare two students. The master said, Hui is almost there. Hui, remember, Hui is Confucius' best student. Okay, he was poor and he died young. Okay, I think last week we talked about him a lot. Confucius feel very sad. Okay, because his best student died so young. So the master said, Hui is almost there. Okay, but he is often wanted. He's in poverty. He's very poor. Then he bring up another student, Si, who is Zhigong. A little bit background. Zhigong was poor when he was young, but he is good in business. So he turned out to make a lot of money. Okay, you can go back to I think book 2. Zhigong was so proud of he was poor, but he never been so proud, when he get rich, something like this. So, and that's Confucius said, Zhigong is not determined by his fate. I think Confucius is talking about he was poor, but he can make money, not being determined by his fate. Yet he enriches himself by speculating correctly in business. That's a very interesting comparison, right? So he probably, that's just my personal feeling, probably Confucius feel like Yan Hui is such a good student, but if he can be a little bit more street smart, okay, and better sense in business, he will not be this poor, and he probably will have a better life. That's just my guess. Okay. Chapter 20. Zizang asked about the Tao of being a good person. Okay, so here it's a very strange word here called 善人. Okay, in general, we can translate as a good person, good man. But again, what's the meaning of a good man or good person? I checked with different chapter. I think it's in the later chapter 13, but book 13, Confucius talk about good person, good people, good man. I think here he means a good politician, okay, a person doing good in traditional way, doing good in government. I think that's what he meant. So that's why Zizang also is a young disciple. He determined to work for government. That's why he asked about the way of being a good man. Okay, so he means how to be a good politician. Okay, the master said he doesn't follow in the track of ancient sage. Therefore, he doesn't enter the inner chapter. I think here the translation is not that difficult. He doesn't follow. That's why he didn't go to the inner chamber. Remember, inner chamber means the good thing. Okay. So I think here Confucius tried to say is being a good politician, a good man is a good thing, but it's not the way of 君子, because I think in book 7, Confucius talk about the 君子. There's a way to be a sage, okay, and the sage is superior than 君子, and there's a different route, okay. So as a good person or good politician, which is superior to the man of perseverance. Okay, so I think that in Confucius' mind, there's a two routes. One is traditionally go to politics. I'm sorry, doing good in the politics, governing, doing good in managing the business. Another way is follow the way of 君子, or then later on become a sage, this kind of way. So Confucius answered Zizang's question is you can just do a good person, okay, a good politician. This way you don't follow the way of the track of ancient sage. Therefore, you will not enter the inner chamber. Okay, but it's not a bad thing, but you will not enter the inner chamber. Just like Zilu already entered the ascent to the hall, but haven't get into the inner chamber. I think that's what Confucius meant about Zizang. And then chapter 21. Here doesn't name who he is talking about, but I kind of feel like Confucius may talking about Zizang, because Zizang just asked about how to be a good man or good politician, and then he want to give a warning or remind Zizang. That's why he said, the master said, we appreciate one's sincere discourse. However, is he a 君子, or is his solemnity only in appearance? So again, here in this chapter, it doesn't show who is Confucius talking about, but I think it's most likely talking about Zizang, because he just mentioned about him, and the Zizang has a tendency to go too far. So Confucius also comment him as he may not be sincere enough. That's why he mentioned about 君子, be a true 君子, you should be sincere from your heart, not just appearance. Okay, thank you. That's my comment. And Amang, you have anything to say, please?
Yeah, just briefly, chapter 19, comparing Yahweh and Zagong. This is another doctrine of the mean, but we're told something a little new here, which is Yahweh is almost there, which is, but he's starving. He's always left wanting. He's always needing real material things for his own survival. Whereas Zagong is, putting his skills to use to not be in want anymore. And Yanhui is much closer to having it, whatever it is. We're told that there's a mean, enough to, meet one's needs, but not so much that you are pursuing avarice. Yanhui is closer, but self denial, complete self-denial is not the route to sagehood, the junsa, whatever this it is that he almost is there. Number 20, where he's talking about the Tao of being a good person, a good politician. I just want to caution, especially modern readers, take the pejorative surrounding the word politician out of this. Politician in the sense of servant of people. That is what it was to be or in service for the people. That's what it meant in the terms that Confucius would understand it as politician, not as in glad handing, baby kissing, going out there and campaigning. That was not the political world in which he lived. And 21, once again, it's a caution against facade. It's the idea of, remember, Zulu, who we just spoke about a little bit ago, is coarse, but he appears on both lists. He's longer kept with this man and longer kept at improving. Yahweh may have been the prodigal son, but Zulu has been there side by side with him since forever. And so when he's talking to Zhejiang about, okay, maybe you could be a good servant of the people or a good politician. Maybe you can be a good man. But is what's coming out of you really sincere? Are you just really working hard to create a facade that positions you somewhere in this world? Because that's not the lessons I'm teaching you either. Coarse but sincere would be better than discourse that is insincere. And yes, it's a word play. I'm sorry for the pun. All right, we're in the last half hour, so I'm going to unload a few other thoughts, and then I'll let everybody have their say, because like I said, took notes. One of the things that really stood out, we were talking about the ontological ideas in Plato and in Confucius. And I believe I said this many years ago. There is a different conception of ontology in the West versus the East. Western culture, Plato, the Nicomachean ethics, we're talking about finding something that is reified and essential and absolute and universal, true as the Pythagorean theorem is always true, regardless of context, regardless of person, regardless of time. Ontology, or what is true from an Eastern mindset, and Confucius embodies this, is what is deep, what was tradition, what was held to be true way back when and is also true now. And the distinction here is that you get to a place of non-essentialism. You're not looking for that one universal true every time, every situation, every person. You understand truth runs deep and it can be individualized within a certain context of, you may be of the ilk of the sage, of the yellow emperor, but you might be more of the ilk of a sage of a jade emperor. And so you should play to your strengths. Your individual strengths are true, but these exemplars from history, these traditions that run through to current, are where you're going to find that truth in a much more real way. This runs right into the nose of Buddhism when it comes into China. And Confucius and Buddhists did not get along for a very, very long time. Yes, they had similarities because both the Buddha and Confucius were skilled teachers. They had what the Buddhists would call skillful means of imparting their lessons in multiple varieties of ways so that they communicated truth to each individual. And this is what I mean about it being non-essentialized. But that essentialism existed within an East Indian mindset in a way it didn't in the West. And so the Buddha looked for a universal truism, suffering, that was universal, and the end of suffering by universalizing the concept of disconnecting wanting. Disconnection was the key that really rocked Confucians, because that disconnection included things like shaving your head, which was your attachment to your ancestry, which ancestor worship and reverence for your family and shao were absolute paramount virtues for the Confucius. It was really hard for these two to reconcile some of those differences. And it took hundreds, if not thousands of years, many occasions of many a Confucian scholar saying, run the bums out of town, send them back over the mountains to the west. We don't need their foreign ways here. Touching on the idea of ritual, and somebody mentioning ritual, I think that was Joe talking about you need the architecture, you need things for ritual. Rituals don't exist without the materials with which to enact those rituals. So there is a materialistic element to Confucian thought that was devoid of that, again, Buddhist idea. You shouldn't need any of the accoutrements, just a banyan tree and enough rice to survive. And the idea of accepting a failure on a test. We were talking today about, giving some students rejection letters who are trying to get into our program. And I was saying, it's good practice because you're going to get rejection letters throughout your whole life, from every job that you're not hired for every school you don't get into, and treating it as if it's the crashing end of the world to be told something didn't go your way or isn't right is not a recipe for resilience. Telling Chai, you're dumb, so study harder. Telling, say you're dull, so sharpen your wits. You're insincere. Try and find your sincerity. You're too coarse. Try and think just a second before you speak. These sort of advices, like I said, not to be harsh for the sake of hurting his students, but to be harsh for them to better themselves in a very constant way and find that deeper, true self that they have. Those were the thoughts I wrote down that I wanted to share with everybody. Thank you again. I'll shut up. I'm excited to hear your ideas, and I may have to run a little early, but if I do, I'm really excited to see you all next week.
Thank you, Amon. Kwon, please.
I think that what Amon just said is very illustrative of what I would say in a more theoretical manner first. And I would like to introduce a historical example illustrating that theory, if I may say so. Once again, it's always the teaching trying to reconcile the general principles, or what I would call ontological rules, to specific real situation in life. And once again, I always want to promote the hexagram, because the hexagram is the first Confucian classic, okay? During the 21 centuries of the Chinese Empire, from 121 BCE to be exact. But the Confucian corpus has only been elevated to the status of state doctrine in 136 BCE. So that's why I say 136 BCE, to the end of the Chinese Empire in 1912. So during that more or less 2,000 years, the Yi Ching has been one of the 5 classics, meaning has been one of the books that have to be studied in order to be part of the administration. And the main figure in that book, the Yi Ching, is the hexagram. You have 3 lines in the lower part that I call the lower trigram, which correspond to what is happening in the time dimension. And you have the 3 lines in the upper part that I call the upper trigram, which correspond to the timeless dimension, to the principles and to the dimensions, compared to the time dimension, which is more in the practical actions. So the 2 examples that I want to use to illustrate those differences in what is the truth in the timeless dimension, which is a more general principle, and what is the truth in the time dimension, which is that truth, but as embodied by a specific person in a specific situations. And what is interesting, I think, in the example that I want to offer is that precisely in 480 BCE, there was a court intrigue because Prince Kwai Kwei wanted to seize the throne. And what is interesting that the two people having their own truth in the time dimension were at the service of Prince Kwai Kwei during that coup d'etat, and they were both disciples of Confucius. And one of those two is precisely the Chai or Cao Chai that Confucius called stupid or dumb or slow-witted, right? And the other one was Zulu, the guy that he said that he will never die in his death, in his bed, I'm sorry. So the two has been mentioned in what we read tonight. In the case of Zhongyou or Zulu, he did not escape because both had the occasion to escape and not to die. But Zulu did not escape as predicted by Confucius, and he fought for Prince Kwai Kwei, and he died in his endeavor to protect the son of Prince Kwai Kwei, who will become later on the future duke. And Cao, the one that Confucius called slow-witted or dumb, chose to escape. Because for Zulu, his truth was to stay and to fight and to die if needed. And the truth for Cao was to escape. And I think that both chose the right decision because they are who they are, even if their truth would bring them to the same truth with a capital T, meaning that from the same principles of truth of the upper trigram or of the timeless reality, you can have two different decisions because the two persons are not at all the same. So that is precisely that doctrine of the mean, that you have to find the truth in the time dimension, respecting the timeless reality because you are who you are. And I just want to finish to say that Gao Chai was not only a little bit slow, but he was very short and he was quite ugly compared to Zulu, who was quite a stalwart guy, having a heroic demeanor and probably quite pleasing to the eye of a woman. So we have here the perfect contrast between two truths in the time dimension for the same in the timeless reality. And I stop here.
Yeah, thank you, Kwang. I think later next week we will talking about actually Zilu introduce a job for Chai, I think. Yeah. So it's one senior student to help one senior and handsome student and help an ugly dumb disciple. And the Confucius complain about this. So we will see next week. Joe, please.
Yeah, I mean, just first to come back to the three passages, and actually it may be the overall theme, I think, this evening is the idea of sincerity and authenticity. Specifically, when I think of number 20, the master said, he does not tread in the footsteps of others. But moreover, he does not enter the chamber of the sage. And I think that not treading the footsteps of others is actually an important thing as far as being your authentic self, but that means having self-knowledge. And that means taking the feedback that I would say that Confucius has been giving his students in order so that they can pursue whatever it is that they their calling, whatever it may be. And if it's politics, so be it. That's just one thought that I have. But also the importance of sincerity in general. And we spoke a little bit about this last week with the idea of rhetoric and the use of rhetoric. And there is a direct relationship between if we're talking about virtue ethics, we're talking about having your character is tied to rhetoric, because what you say actually means something. You're actually speaking from what you truly believe to be true. So that's why, and your character matters because you're not necessarily going back on your word. So that there's that relationship with rhetoric from last week, specifically, I forget what passage it was. I think it might have been your translation, actually, Jason, that had it. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, and that was one of the skills to be honed. So I mean, I look at the chapter overall is, kind of this gradual process of honing your skills and then having knowledge of yourself so that you have the idea of how to properly act in the world. So that's what I've taken away mostly from chapter 11, although I find Amon's ontology discussion actually to be really interesting, especially if you're differentiating the difference between the East and the West. I had not thought of it from that ontologies would actually be so different. But I'd love to hear more if anybody else has any more to offer on that in particular, because I think that that's a very, very interesting, is the idea of truth within that ontology of the. So anyway.
Thank you, Joe. I think I need to. Do anyone have any comment, General, for today? I'm going to hand over the host to Joe, and I probably have to leave in a few minutes. If you want, we can continue, have a more general discussion. And then next week, I think we will finish book 11 for next week, and then we can move on. So thank you, everyone. And Joe, Mark, please.
I just want to thank Amon, although he's not here, also because his discussion of ontology was so well complemented by Quan. And I did have a question. We don't necessarily have to go into it now. Maybe we've already talked about it, but can one be a sage without having already at some point been a good statesman or politician or diplomat in some way, civil servant? That was one question. And also, thank you, Joe, for talking about sincerity and authenticity and relating it back to that I think it was she didn't follow in the footsteps of the others. And I think that Jason had mentioned sincerity when we were talking about book 10, chapters 1 and 2, where we had this double word that showed up, shun shun. I'm not sure if I wrote it down correctly, Jason, but you said that it indicates the emphasis on just how good. And you said, as such, he is very, very sincere and earnest. And I believe, I don't know what the Chinese word would be, but doesn't Quan sincerity come up in the Great Learning as one of the steps, like for a pure heart or something? I don't remember which one it was.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You have to put order in your own personal affairs. After, you have to be sincere and etc. You remember very well.
And the last thing I would mention was the interesting contrast that Aman made between the Buddhists and the Confucians, and how the sort of ideological side on the Buddhists, that you should be so stripped down, resulted in them cutting their hair, which was such an anathema to the Confucians, because for the Confucians, I didn't realize this, but you said that it had a relationship with the ancestors. So there's on both sides an ideological rationale for the connection with hair or the rejection of hair. And yet in both cases, it ends up being physical, like what Quan was saying about the lower trigram, perhaps. But one thing I would have asked him on, if he was able to stay on, was about the ritual, because I think one of the contrasts he made was between the Confucian, deep connection with ritual and Li, but he said the Buddhists, they really didn't need anything. All you needed was a banyan tree. And I think I understand the point he was making, but there's also that discussion of the Buddha had with Sagala, where Sagala was an ordinary householder, and he was in the habit of performing these rituals to the north, to the south, to the west, to the east, and to the zenith and the nadir, which were these kind of abstract things. And the Buddha said, well, why don't you instead make it, not sacrifice, but whatever the ritual was, I'm not sure what it was exactly, to your parents and to your wife and to your children and to your friends and to your teachers and to the ordinary workers. So reinterpreting the ritual, but not in any way trying to denigrate the ritual or sort of erase it. Thanks, gals.
Well, thank you, Mark. Is it Nicholas? You have a hands up. You have a physical hands up. You want to say something, or?
For the next lesson, I'm gonna download the Confucius. I forget the name of the title.
I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah,
Joe
will put in the chat so you can download.
Yeah, I'll download on the on the Amazon. I have a Kindle.
You don't have to download from the Kindle. You can just get the online, PDF file or on the PDF file or online. Yeah, I can put in the chat. I can put in the chat for you.
Cool.
Okay. You don't have to buy it. Well, if you want to buy it, you can buy it. But there's a lot of free version.
Wouldn't it be easier with the Kindle, so I could go, so I can have it in front of so I can have the Kindle front. I could follow along, for lack of a better word. I can have the Kindle in front of me by I mean, how would that work out if I had the book, the literature on my iPad? How would I follow along while you giving the lecture?
Organized in sections, and also there's a free version available that you can just see on your browser on your.
So I just put it in the chat. So if you click on that link, that will actually give you all the chapters not chapters, all the books, I should say.
Yeah, you can click that one, and when we discuss, and you will show verse by verses. Okay, so my chapter is exactly the same as that one. So next week you go to book 11 and chapter 22nd. That was started for next week. Yeah.
Gotcha.
I just bought mine on Amazon, Kindle free. It was free. It's on my Kindle.
The
I got
physical.
it on my iPad.
That's
you
a
have-
physical
Do you have Prime
Yeah.
prime. Yeah, yeah.
and
Oh,
Kindle
Oh, so you have the
Unlimited?
free.
Oh, that's probably why.
Yeah.
It's the
That's what-
copyright. Yes, copyright lapsed, huh? Just kidding. Sorry.
Okay, so
I'll
I
do the
need to,
PDF file. I'll do the PDF file.
yeah, any file, thank you for joining, and then I probably need to go. And Joe, I will hand over to you.
Okay.
So Joe, download, send me the PDF file. Joseph.
I just put it in the chat. So if you registered for the meetup, I'll send it through you meetup time. If you give me a minute.
Mhm.
But we can go to Quan, I think, in the interim, but hang on one second. Let me just make sure. Where did you register?
Meetup, the app, the website.
Through which group? May I? Is it the Seattle group?
Phoenix, Arizona.
That's where you're located. Okay, probably. All right, Seattle. I'll look for you.
No, Phoenix,
All right.
Arizona. Phoenix. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'll look for you and then I'll try and send it to you.
Mm-hmm.
But if Quan, I know Quan and Anne and Leah all had their hands up, so why don't we let them go ahead and speak?
Nicholas, I just wanted to say that sometimes it's a little challenging with all the different translations, but you're probably
Yes.
baseline translation to actually follow the enumerations. That's it can be a little bit of a taxing event, just so you know. But you're probably getting one that will match up with our discussion.
Oh, is your physical copy cool? You have the physical copy, correct? You have the physical copy? The hard copy?
I have one. Yes. So,
So I'll do the I'll do the PDF file. I'll do the actual hard copy.
okay. You can print it out as well, if you wish. But I am having difficulty finding you. I only have 2 sites that it's on.
Forget, but we're family.
So, Quan, why don't you? Do you have any comments?
Yes. It's about precisely the inner chamber and the rituals. Here, it's not always obvious, but the inner chamber is precisely what is needed absolutely to put into action one of the major advice given by Confucius in, I don't remember in what chapter exactly, but it's between 5 and 10. That major advice being that we have prescribed rituals, but the true gentleman would be capable to see in what specific situation you have to go above the rituals and just ignore them and acting beside the rituals or even in contradiction to the rituals because the higher justice would demand us to push aside the rituals or to even go against the ritual. And that very practical advice given by Confucius, that I would try to make an effort to find the exact paragraph, because it's very important and it's precisely related to what we read tonight in chapter 11, in the 7 or 8 paragraphs that we read in chapter 11, because it is precisely that dialectics, or that dance, as I used to say, between the upper trigram and the lower trigram. Because often, maybe I'm wrong here, but I have the impression that the people think that the epistemological journey is from 1 to 6, and when you are 6, you're simply a floating spirit, and 1 to 3 just disappear. It's not the case. I mean, when you go to, you have to transcend 1, 2, 3 to go to 4, 5, 6. But once you're at 4, 5, 6, you need to bring it down to 1, 2, 3. Okay, because I want to once again to use the allegory of the cave, because the movement of the people in that allegory are perfect. You have to free yourself from the chain in the cave. You have to go outside the cave and see the Son of the Absolute. Okay, so that is the movement of being uplifted above 1, 2, 3. But once you're outside, you don't stay outside. You return to the cave, meaning that you will bring what is you understood at 4, 5, 6, and you put it in 1, 2, 3. I think that we said in one of our past and numerous conversations that when you say Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ is 1, 2, 3 of the time. Jesus is 1, 2, 3 of the time dimensions, and Christ is 4, 5, 6 of the timeless dimension. And the dash between Jesus and Christ is precisely the integration of the different layers of existential reality. I stop here.
Are you referring to like the Holy Spirit in that particular instance? So something that is transcendent, like I guess because you're speaking about transcendence to a certain,
Yes, but I think that transcendence and immanence, it might sound very pretentious, but I can be very pretentious on the philosophical level. It's a false dichotomy. Okay, it's a false dichotomy, meaning a differentiation that can be very misleading. What I said precisely about the upper trigram and the lower trigram that have to be put together, and that what we said many months ago about Jesus Christ is a perfect way to say it in a very short, in a nutshell, okay? In the sense that both have to be present at the same time. A life that is only limited to the lower trigram or to the time dimension is not interested because too down to earth. A life that is only limited to the timeless dimension is a little bit floating. So you need the two together. So I think that the philosophical distinction between transcendence and immanence, most of the time, it's very interesting, and I don't have the pretension not to use them because I use those concepts, but not as absolute opposites. Okay, and I'm sorry, my Chinese side is coming back. That is an excellent image.
The yin and the yang.
Yes, that is an excellent image of not to fall into the false concept or the false trap of immanence or transcendence. The two are together. Or if you want, that is the Chinese way to illustrate it in a down-to-earth manner. But I think that it's Joe or it's me, I don't know. But I remember having a conversation with Joe about Jesus Christ with the dash as the middle. The Christian way to say that same thing than the yin and yang diagram is Jesus Christ, okay? Jesus, the time dimension, Christ, the timeless dimension, but those two are not disjointed in a false dichotomy. Those two are together, and the dash, when you write the name Jesus Christ, the dash symbolize that they are together, and that is the fulfilled life, that is a complete life. And here, the white fish and the black fish, the fact that they are together in a circle, the circle in the Chinese symbol is playing the same role than the dash in the name of Jesus Christ.
It didn't sound pretentious. It sounds profound.
Pardon? Excuse me?
It didn't sound pretentious. It sounds profound.
Pretentious? I'm sorry, I don't understand the word.
He said it didn't sound pretentious. It sounded profound.
Oh,
so he is he's complimenting it. His saying.
I thank you very much, Nicholas.
Very intriguing.
I'm actually trying to be kind of thinking about this idea of inner harmony, and how that actually is achieved in general. So, and I don't necessarily think you have to be a sage, right? As far as it is that in order to achieve that inner harmony, obviously you don't. And so the inner harmony is, I'm trying to map it to the triagram itself. Do you have actually an image of that? The upper and lower? You're muted.
I would make some promotion for South Korea. You can look on the flag of South Korea. You have an image of the trigram, and an hexagram is very simple. You have a trigram, and you have the lower trigram 3 lines, and you have the upper trigram 3 other lines, and those 6 lines together are the hexagram. You open any book, any copy of the I Ching, and that you have an image of the hexagram. It's the main concept of the I Ching as the legacy of the Shang dynasty, having ruled from 1600 BCE to 1046 BCE, and also a legacy of the Zhou dynasty, having ruled from 1046 BCE to 256 BCE. I'm sorry to repeat those dates often, but you know that I am here also to promote the Chinese civilization, so forgive me.
It's a culture clash. A culture clash.
No, it's not the culture clash if you're speaking of the hexagram. It's the fact that we all have a time dimension or a becoming dimension and a timeless dimension or a being dimension. And precisely, if you understand that image or the teaching of the I Ching, there is no clash between becoming and being. The two have to be integrated. The two have to be together in order for your life to be happy and to be fulfilled.
That's food for thought.
Mark?
Thank you, Juan. And I think the passage you were thinking of, you were right. It was between 5 and 10. I think it was 9.24. And like Aman, I also take notes. So Quan, this is a paraphrase of what you said, if not maybe exactly what you said. This is the most important passage from Book 9. Confucius is almost seen, or is almost always seen, as a school of blind obedience. This says you have to develop the mind to the point where you are able to understand where and when to break the rules in order to remain ethical, or break the glasses, whichever comes first. In order to, let me read that again. But this says you have to develop the mind to the point where you are able to understand where and when to break the rules in order to remain ethical. The Book of Rituals are only reminders for grand occasions, and at the core is the epistemological developments which would allow us to develop in order to know how to be a true gentleman.
Just like Niccolo Machiavelli.
Slightly different. Nicholas, you may want to raise your hand when if possible. I know you're on an iPad there in order to before speaking.
Gotcha.
No, actually, there is a professor. His name is escaping me. I can find it out in 1 second. Engels, who's written a book on Confucius, and it's titled "Growing Moral," and actually he talks about this very thing that Mark just brought up. That is not necessarily following just following things blindly. That the objective of a teacher is actually to guide you so that you aren't necessarily just following rituals blindly, so that you have an understanding as to why the ritual exists. And we talked about this last week, why the ritual exists in the first place. So not only that, it was also the idea of when to break away from ritual, so that there's that aspect of it. Otherwise, that's one of the roles of the teacher, is actually to help the student to see that. That's what Professor Engels wrote, or I'm just paraphrasing some of the things that he said in his book. But yeah, that is, and I think that that's something that was not, I had misunderstood myself when it had come to Confucianism, because I did feel like it was blind obedience to a certain degree, because there was such a heavy, heavy emphasis on ritual, specifically even in what I think it's book 2, the idea of mourning for 3 years or something like that, and having like very specific, and then being appropriately dressed and acting appropriately at certain ceremonies, political ceremonies, and then therefore, if you weren't, then you weren't necessarily you were breaking away from tradition, and that actually had some ramifications, as we've discussed. But I appreciate Mark bringing that up, because that is one of the things that I thought, when I think of Confucianism, I think of it, initially, that it was just following ritual more than it was deep introspection. And obviously, what we read today speaks to that very deeply, in the sense that if there is an element of understanding the self, and understanding, your not only understanding your role, but also not necessarily you're pursuing virtue above all else, and that may be in accordance with ritual, but not in but it's never to another that the pursuit of virtue, I see, is actually primary in Confucianism, as opposed to actually the obedience factor, although obedience is a part of that, as Quan had noted a little bit earlier.
I think Nicholas raised his hand.
Oh, go ahead, Nicholas. Sorry, I was looking down.
But Confucianism structured and organized the contemporary era and the modern era.
It is. It has a heavy influence on China today. Very heavy influence on China today. I'm not as skilled to be able to express the difference between Neo-Confucianism and Confucius's teaching. Perhaps Quan actually could help that, because
Yeah.
that is something that I do struggle with sometimes. Because the parts of Neo-Confucianism that I have read seem very similar.
Yeah. What did you mean very similar?
The role and for you to of how you're one supposed to look at yourself first and before judging others, but you also have obligations to other people in the world, so that there are moral obligations and to your fellow man. And then, I mean, that's kind of where we even saw this evening with the second, I don't know, it was, I don't know, 22 or something like that, where he was talking about helping a wealthy man get more wealthy. That doesn't necessarily make, the idea to be more, restoring some type of balance, and that there's some moral responsibility. And I get the idea of moral responsibility between Neo-Confucianism and Confucianism seems very similar to me. But
Yes.
I'm not a scholar. I'm no scholar.
No, you understand the core essential of that, okay? Because after all, Neo-Confucianism is Confucianism. And I would say that in a nutshell, the difference between Neo-Confucianism and Confucianism first is a difference of 1,500 years, because
Right.
Neo-Confucianism is a product of the Song Dynasty. And during the Song Dynasty, there's a famous guy called Zhu Xi, ZHU, that is his family name, and CXI is his given name. He was born in 1120 and he died in 1200. I'm sorry, he was born in 1130 and he died in 1200. And he's very important because from him, the understanding of Confucianism will be according to his interpretation. And I would say that he embodies a little bit the tragedy of a genius wanting to bring good to the world, and he brought good to China for a certain extent and a lot of stuff. But at the same time, the Chinese were so impressed with him that they tend to interpret Confucianism and virtue ethics precisely a little bit in a rigid manner according to his compendium of interpretation. And in the Ming Dynasty, later on, the Ming Dynasty having ruled between 1368 and 1644, so almost 3 centuries, it became so rigid that argumentation needs to use practically words for words what he wrote in his commentary of Confucianism. So here, that's why I'm always a little bit of a caricature sometimes when I always repeat that we have to distinguish Confucianism as a school of reflection and of epistemology and ontology, and that school can be more or less alive depending of the period of the Chinese history. And you have to see the other Confucianism, I'm sorry, which is the state doctrine, okay? And the state doctrine is never, or very rarely, the alive philosophical discussion, or the living philosophical discussion, rather. And the other thing that would distinguish Confucianism and Neo-Confucianism, except for the time, is that in the 11th century with Neo-Confucianism, you have a lot of metaphysical consideration that is developed considerably compared to the short sentences coming from the 5th century BCE or from the Zhou royal house or legacy, that you always have to make extensions on the 3 or 4 words or characters on each line. So it is a kind of expansion on metaphysical and epistemological consideration, even if I would suggest that in the original Confucianism, epistemology is very developed, and it has been developed even more under the Song Dynasty, but the metaphysical or ontological dimension has been developed more. And because, and I will stop here, let's not forget that the Chinese classics are divided in 4 books and 5 classics, and the 4 books are devoted only to epistemology, okay? And the branches of epistemology, the 4 books being the Analects, what we are reading tonight, the book, the Doctrine of the Mean, the Tashui, the Great Learning. Once again, Great Learning is not about information or skills, but about being, and the Mengzi, meaning the eponymous book of the philosopher called Mencius in the West. Let's stop here.
I mean, there's 2 great questions out of that, though. One is obviously the role of education and how that may have changed between Confucianism and Neo-Confucianism, and what were the difference in the metaphysics with Neo-Confucius?
Okay, from a very down-to-earth historical perspective, Buddhism was introduced in China around the 2nd century of this era, okay? But before Buddhism became truly popular, it would take another 4 centuries. So Buddhism became something very ordinary around the 7th century, corresponding to the Tang Dynasty, okay? Tang Dynasty having ruled between 618 to 907. So from a historical perspective, Neo-Confucianism is the product of the interaction between 2 Chinese traditions, Confucianism and Taoism, with the philosophical and epistemological apport of Buddhism. It means that when Confucius, for example, said that you cannot even serve man, how can you serve heavens? That is the more classical Confucianism insisting more on this life. If you read all the 5, I said that you have the 4 books and the 5 classics, okay? In the 4 books, the big mentality is subsumed by what Confucius said. If you cannot even serve man, how can you serve heavens or the spirits? But if you read the 5 classics, okay, meaning the book of poetry, the book of documents, the Yi Ching, the Chun Chu, and the book on the rituals, considerations about the spirits and heavens and the beyond are galore, okay? So if you take the 2 group of classics, the 5 classics, the 4 books together, the more what we would call religious dimension was very present in ancient China at the time of Confucius. But with Neo-Confucianism, that what we would call religious dimension would have a very big presence, balancing the more epistemological focus, classical Confucianism from the 5th century BCE.
And then the role of education aspect of it, I guess it would be, you're saying it was becoming more rigid, and so rigid that it was almost not even kind of useful for his way of, as far as critical thinking is concerned. So
yes, it has that effect, and I would say that the highest effect has been perceived at the end of the Ming Dynasty in the 17th century, according to my understanding.
Interesting. Yeah.
Joe, can I just jump in for a sec?
Absolutely, please do.
Quan, I was just wondering earlier, is it the case that being a sage requires you to have been a good administrator at some point to gain that experience, or do those 2 paths not have to cross each other?
That is a very deep question, Mark, and it is precisely one of my favorite hypotheses. I always say that the Confucianists and the Taoists were the same people at the beginning, meaning the scholars. And your question, the Confucianists answer yes, and the Taoists answer no. Okay, and they were the same people at the beginning, in the sense that what is perceived or what is presented as a Confucianist from, let's take the official date of 136 BCE, okay, when Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty chose the Confucian corpus as the state doctrine. From that moment, it is obvious that if you, because let's not forget what the Chongyong, the doctrine of the mean, said, and it has been also stated in the Ta Sui, the Great Learning. You have 4 circles of practice for your virtues. First, you have to put the order in yourself. After you have to cultivate yourself. 1, 2, you have to put order in your family. 3, you have to assist the government, and 4, you bring peace to the world. Right. So the Confucianists would answer, you cannot reach to the top if you don't go through the assistance to the state, and if you don't bring peace to the world. And the Taoists would answer no, because there is no need necessarily to assist the state, that you can assist people in your community without necessarily having an official position. And you can bring peace to the world without necessarily being an ambassador, a minister, or a president of a state. You can bring peace to the world by action in your community, or by action through an organization having a global reach, for example, but not governmental.
Yeah, I actually do remember that. You know, one thing actually, in general, now that we've spoken about the metaphysics, is there, I mean, as far as science is concerned in determining cause and effect, did they have formal, like, I mean, I haven't read anything yet that speaks to that other than the intuition, and in the sense that there's, you know, there's this idea of how there's a philosophical, you know, end of it, and there's an ontological end of it, obviously, and there's a metaphysical end of it. But is there, I haven't come across any, you know, pure science as we would call it in the West.
Yes, for that kind of thing, you have to go to another school, because in Chinese philosophy, Confucianism is really for epistemology, education, and ethics and politics. And what would be subsumed under epistemology, but more the scientific or technical dimension, you have to go to a school called Mohism, Mohism.
Oh, that's right.
And it's from Master Mo, of course, Mo Zi, and he's about the time of, he's between Confucius and Mencius. Okay, so it's about the 4th century BCE. And if you want the kind of technical consideration, you also have to go to the Fajia, okay, the legalists, because many legalists were hydraulic engineers, and they have all kind of technical considerations on hydraulic engineering, but not only on that, on architecture, on astronomy, on mathematics, and etc. Let's not forget that in the 6 arts of the liberal education of the gentleman, you have mathematics, and there is a classics of mathematics not having a collective authorship between the 10th century BCE and the 2nd century BCE, called the Zhou Pi Suan Jing, Zhou, Z-H-O-U, P-B-I, Suan, S-U-A-N, Jing, G-I-N-G. That is a classical of mathematics from the Zhou dynasty. So I just mentioned 2 or 3 that would tackle the kind of technical and epistemological, but in the sense of what the West would call science, or natural science, or as opposed to ethical or political science.
It is actually. Does anybody else have any comments about this evening's passages? I mean, there are certain things that I appreciated with it. I mean, I started to see more clearly as to the examples that Confucius is giving us are much more clear to me going through this now. Maybe it's stepping away for a month, but
I guess I'll just mention, I feel like there's a little bit of an element of surprise in what we're reading, almost as if each one is supposed to be a riddle, like prefiguring a koan in some way. Does anyone else sense that?
Yes, I agree. I think that the rapprochement with a koan is very interesting, because the koan is a short enigma stating universal principles, but at the same time has to be solved at the personal level.
I actually may need to drop off a bit early this evening.
Well, thank you so much, Joe, for leading.
No problem. We have, I'll just do a really quick update on upcoming events. Tomorrow night we have neuroscience, and that's our comprehensive this Wednesdays. Thursday we have Seneca. We'll be covering the letters, and then on Friday we'll be covering Design Your Life, actually, and it'll be about a holistic medicine. So, or more a holistic approach to medicine. So, anyway, if anybody else has any comments, I have something I need to tend to.
It was nice meeting you.
Very nice
Joe.
meeting you. All right. Take care, everyone. Unless I can leave one of you in charge.
No, we can see each other next week.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.